Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. It's great to see you, and it's an honor to be here with NCAI. I want to thank everybody for the chance to be here. I want to thank President Keel and the whole group of officers, all the different members around the country, and my fellow commissioners who are here as well. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Indian Law and Order Commission. This was the commission that was created by the passage of the Tribal Law and Order Act last year. We're up and running. We actually have a public hearing here this afternoon on criminal justice issues in Indian country, and I'm looking forward very much to talking to you a little bit about this. So, got to show my slides here. What do? You're counting on a middle-aged man. This is my birthday today. This is my birthday. My hairline was not always here. My hairline used to be down here. All right. So, thank you. I see it. So, this is, I don't know, how many Egyptians do we have in the room this morning? I'm just curious. Could you please stand up and turn sideways so I can tell? This is my name, Troy Ide, or we'd say Id in Arabic, and that's how you say it. Now, I don't know how you get the 3 letters versus all that pretty gold script, but that's how we say it. Anybody know what that means in Arabic? What does the word mean in Arabic? Anybody know? Party. It means party or celebration. Not only that, but a recurring party or celebration. So I'm the party guy, and I'm honored to be here. It's perfect for a person who gets to be a guest and work in Indian country. All right, very quickly, Tribal Law and Order Act. What did it do? Well, it was intended to make federal agencies more transparent and accountable, and there's some of that going on now. Next week, we're going down to meet with 18 United States attorneys from around the country. And we're going to be talking about the so-called case declination reporting. That's when they don't take a case and everybody wonders what happened. I myself am a former United States attorney. I served from 2006 to 2009, and I know this is a major issue, but it's also hard to describe when is it that a case becomes a case. If an investigation is of such poor quality that it comes to an office that you can't do anything with it, is that case really being declined, or was it ever a case? And so that's one of the issues we're trying to figure out. How do they implement that provision? Make things more transparent. So there's some of this going on, and it's good. It's very positive. And then what the Act is designed to do is to provide some more freedom, not enough in my view, but more freedom to tribes to be able to run their own justice systems, to do some innovation. And that also is happening, but I think there's not nearly as much flexibility as there ought to be. So we have the enhanced sentencing options. There may be 20 tribes around the country that are actually looking at longer sentences. I would respectfully submit that that's not the trend we see in a lot of other places, but that there is a little bit more flexibility. As you know, the way the law was set before, Indian nations could only impose sentences of up to a year in jail or a $5,000 fine. So there's flexibility to go up to 3 years and so on. But it's important to understand the limitations, that not many want to do that. I've been chair of the Navajo Nation Bar Association Training Committee for a while. We've got 144 jail beds for a nation of about 250,000 people. How many more incarceration days are we going to actually be able to do in an environment like that? So understanding the intention is good, the limits are there. Expanding training is good. We see a lot more of that, and we see, as I mentioned, more transparencies. But this is the reason why I'm here, and I won't take much of your time. If you think about the greatest challenges to Indian country and criminal justice today, they are structural, and no offense to anybody because we all worked hard to pass this act, but the Tribal Law and Order Act doesn't do much about any of them, if you think about it. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about these institutions that predate the modern era of tribal sovereignty. The Major Crimes Act, passed in 1885, was the law that took away the inherent jurisdiction, or purported to do so, of tribes to be able to have control over their citizens for criminal justice matters. And one of the things about when you teach law school, your students can do free research for you. It's a great thing. And one of the things I do is get to be involved with that. And when you research the Major Crimes Act of 1885, it was a bill that never even had a hearing. It was an appropriations rider. They put it on an appropriations bill and said, oh, by the way, all these Indian people out there, we're going to make them subject to federal jurisdiction from now on. But they didn't worry a lot about it from the little bit of legislative history we can find, because they figured the whole world would be allotted away, that the native land base would be gone in a generation through allotment. So the federal role was always designed to be temporary. Well, here we are, 2011, and we still have this enduring federal presence. Never intended to be part of the system, but that's what we've inherited. That's what we have to deal with. And as I'll talk about, it distorts the system in ways that systematically creates injustices for Native people. So we're going to do a pop quiz to wake you up, all right? So let's do 5 questions here. We're going to just talk about juvenile justice. First question. Question number 1. Native American juvenile offenders account for what percentage of all juveniles currently held in federal criminal detention? Of all people. A is 4%, B 7%, C 17%, or D 66%. What's the answer? 17, 7, 66. Well, you know, it is 2/3 of all juveniles, roughly. Of every juvenile who's in federal custody today is Native. Now, there are about, overall, adults and juveniles in the federal system, to put it in perspective, there are about 340,000 people in federal criminal detention right now. And of all the juveniles, 2/3 of them are Native American. Now, how could that be? A relatively small portion of the population. Again, this operation of the federal system. So let's dig into that. Question number 2, true or false? Native American juveniles who allegedly commit felonies on tribal lands are automatically transferred to federal custody even when tribal courts assert jurisdiction and have rehabilitative programs available for them. Does that ever happen? True or false? True. It is true. But why is that? And why do we allow it to continue? 2 laws, fundamentally. I talked about the Major Crimes Act. What it did is extraordinary and radical, and it should really get under your skin if you've never thought about it. Why is it that on Native American lands, which were won at such a brutal cost for generations and people fought and died for these lands, why is it that if someone is living on their land, that they're living on the land that was supposed to be the perpetual homeland, and so much went through to get that land? Why is it that that is federal jurisdiction? Why would the federal government, which does not do local crimes, not in the business of local law enforcement in any other context, why is that the case? Well, this historical legacy. You know, back in 1885, it was supposed to be temporary. Native people were supposed to all be assimilated, the lands would be busted up, and that was the end of it. But you know, Native people were much more resilient than anybody ever imagined at that time in terms of the mainstream white world. So what happens? We're still stuck with this system. So local crimes in our country, if we walk out in the street right now here in Portland, something happens to somebody, right? We're in local jurisdiction. You don't send some juvenile who does something to federal court. They don't go to federal detention. It would be absurd if a person in Portland could not walk over across the street to their courthouse and see that judge and talk to that prosecutor, talk to that public defender. Or you could be, in my home state, in contrast, in Indian country. The closest federal courthouse to the Ute Mountain Ute Nation, I see Chairman Hayes is here from Ute Mountain, is 400 miles away from his capital. 400 miles to the nearest federal judge. The U.S. Attorney's Office, which I used to run, is 400 miles away. They have a local satellite office, but no Article III federal judge. I mean, what kind of a system takes local crimes and makes them into federal offenses? In our country, less than 1% of all the crimes that are prosecuted are federal. 99% is state and local. But for Native people, it's flipped. The major crimes, the federal government's there. Was never supposed to be a long-term part of our culture and our country. That was never supposed to happen. And yet we don't even question it most of the time. And then the other law is this thing called the Juvenile Justice Act, Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Act of 1938. I mean, was 1938 a good year for Indian sovereignty and self-determination? I mean, this was a very difficult period for our country in terms of respect for Indian nations. And yet, at that time, Congress said, we're going to start automatically transferring these juveniles into federal custody. Did it ever occur to anyone we might want to take another look at the Juvenile Justice Act of 1938 and ask, do we really want to be sending all these young people into such a different system? And why is it different? Well, question 3. Think about this. What percentage of all Native American juveniles who are incarcerated by the federal government, what percentage of them receive early parole? What's the answer? Don't make me call on you. And why is it 0? Because there is no parole in the federal system. Now, how radical is that if you think about it? My home state of Colorado, and I've been a state official, my home state, if someone is sentenced to a term of incarceration by a state judge in Colorado, they serve in our State Department of Corrections 32% of the sentence to which they've been received from the judge. They're out. Why? Because of parole, because of good time credits, because of other kinds of programs that get them out sooner. We don't lock people up for the full length of their sentence. You know, how do you compare that world, which the vast majority of Americans live in and don't even question, to what happens in Indian country, where suddenly a Native person, just because they're on their own land and they happen to be Native, they end up in a federal system where there is no parole? Is that a problem? What does that lead to? What does that happen? What happens as a result of that? Because there is no parole, there is no way out early. Well, think about this for a second, true or false. Native American juveniles who are incarcerated by the federal government on average serve roughly 15% longer sentences behind bars than non-natives for the same or similar offenses. Is that true or false? True? You guys, come on, it's my birthday. Be good. It's false. It's not 15%, it's 50%. It's twice as long on average for the same crime. You guys doubt me? Take a look at the case in the 8th Circuit just this week in the Bone Shirt case, United States versus Bone Shirt. Everybody ought to read that case. You know why? Because a young Native man who committed murder, and I don't condone murder, believe me, and my heart goes out to the victims and the victims' families. And I prosecuted a lot of these cases. But you know, this young man, this juvenile, was sentenced to 48 years in federal prison as a juvenile. He went adult. They treated him as an adult. So he's now going to have a 48-year prison term as a juvenile for killing someone. You know, the dissenting judge, it was a 2-to-1 decision. This dissenting judge says, you know, this is South Dakota. The average Native American male in South Dakota lives to be 58 years old. So we are sending this young man away. He'll be dead by the time he gets out. Now, why should that upset us, other than the fact that it's an unbelievably long sentence for any person to have to go through? Well, think about it this way. Last year, the United States Supreme Court, in a case Florida versus Graham, held that when a juvenile in the Florida system or in any state is sentenced to life in prison without parole by a state, that's cruel and unusual punishment. It violates the 8th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. You can't do it. And they took that case and they reversed that sentence on that young man. What about that Native person from South Dakota, Mr. Boneshirt? Does he get to take advantage of that? No. Why not? Because that's the current law here. We don't even think about the fact that this system treats Native Americans unequally, systematically, not occasionally, systematically on average. That young man does not have a chance for parole. And unless somebody goes in there and makes this argument that I'm trying to make to all of you, he's going to sit in that prison, he's probably going to die in that prison. And no other juvenile in this country right now would go through that with any state court, given what the U.S. Supreme Court has done. These are the kinds of distortions we don't even think about that this federal system inflicts on us all the time. And then finally, talking about going adult, you know, if you're not in Indian country, it's less than 2% of all the juvenile cases are sentenced as adults. They have wellness courts, they have diversion programs, they have all sorts of other programs. But in the federal system, what percentage of juveniles in the federal system are sentenced as adults? And you can guess that it is a third. What we know, because they don't break out the numbers in a way that's easy to inspect, it's not very transparent, but we know that 2/3 of all juveniles in federal criminal detention are Native, and we know that all population, of all of them, 1/3 of all the federal juveniles are sentenced as adults. So we know it's disproportionately Native young people are likely being sentenced as adults. So this is just an example of why we have an Indian Law and Order Commission. You know, people ask us, well, what's your role? Our role is we're independent. We were created to look at the structure, to see how the Tribal Law and Order Act is doing, but also to see what it didn't attempt to do, these hard issues that people don't talk a lot about. We need to think about the structure in Indian country, and we need to put our heads together and say, do we really want to live in a world 20, 30 years from now where local government anywhere in this country is controlled by Washington, D.C.? I don't know about you, but I think it's time to have this kind of a conversation. So we got a group of people, we're all volunteers. They were all appointed by the President, Congress, and some of them are here, actually all but one of them are here today. And as we go forward today for the rest of this discussion, and I invite you to our hearing this afternoon as well, just please keep in mind, what are these barriers to equal justice that I talked about? I just used one example of juveniles. Number one, systematic underfunding. I don't have to tell you, these chronic studies that we get. You know, there was one under Gerald Ford, there was one under Bill Clinton, there was one in 2006 that Chris Cheney had done in the administration I served, George W. Bush. You know, it is half as much resource as off-reservation is going into policing, and we have a problem. It's a systematic, structural problem. It isn't enough to say we get one presidential administration and, oh, it's great, everything will be fine. It's not, because if you look at the trend line, it does not improve over time in terms of resources. So we got to fix that structure. Is it right, is it fair for a group of Americans to systematically receive half of what everybody else gets? Is that right in our country? Jurisdictional complexity. You all know about these issues. You know, I'm mindful of what happened just recently in Washington State. A lot of you saw this case. You've got hot pursuit. You've got a drunk non-Indian who's on the reservation. He gets pulled over by the tribal cop, and the tribal cop's not even allowed to pursue that person and detain them under a mutual aid agreement to call up the state trooper off reservation to come get that guy. You know, what the tribal cop told me was, you know, I had to just basically find a way to get his keys and just find a way basically for him to volunteer, and I could get him off reservation and take him someplace where he wouldn't kill one of our tribal citizens. I mean, what kind of a law is that? But that's what we see in too much of the country because of this jurisdictional complexity. I talked about the word that a lawyer shall never talk about and have a future in the law, which is we only had one federal criminal trial on an Indian reservation in the 20th century, one, 2005 at Shiprock. Why is it that we have this system and they've never figured out that we need to have federal judges close to where Native people live? That this is part of their responsibility. Do you think it's going to improve if we stick with this federal system? Are you going to see a flood of federal judges start coming out and living on the res? You know, I doubt it. So maybe the system isn't the local system we want and need. Less accountable federal officials. When I was a U.S. attorney, I used to ask people, how many of you voted for me to be your U.S. attorney? And you know, once in a while somebody put their hand up, but no Native person ever did, because they know. They didn't pick me. They didn't pick any of us. We get appointed by presidents, we serve, we leave. Our offices are career. They do great work. I have great respect for them. But you know, they're not local. Native people don't own this system. Longer prison sentences in jail, as I talked about. And then all this leading to underreporting of crimes, which drives a lot of bad data, which prevents resources from flowing. So bottom line to you is, you know, we love the res, right? If you need to haul wood, you find a way to haul wood. And we got to find a way. We cannot be discouraged by the fact that this is hard. You know, we all face challenges. Many people in this room were leaders in the movement in the 60s and 70s to begin to start planting the seeds for self-determination. You know, if you looked at federal funding for law enforcement to Indian nations, it was at its absolute lowest point in the early to mid-60s. And it was at that time where tribes said, you know, we don't have the resources, we don't have what we need, but we're going to still take charge. We're going to start doing what became ultimately the groundwork for the 638 program in law enforcement. Tribal police departments, Indian nations coming together, building their own programs, building their own departments, exercising local government despite the odds, despite, you know, as we now know, state taxation ever encroaching. You know, we've got to say, even though these issues are hard, even though there's not a lot of money, we can't be paralyzed by that, because Mr. Boneshirt's sitting in detention right now. If he were sitting in Florida in a state prison, they'd have let him out. But you know, as long as there are Mr. Boneshirts in this country who are Native people, and only because they're Native and only because they're on tribal land, they're treated this way, we really can't rest. Thank you.
That picture of that car?
Yeah.
That's my brother's car.
Jefferson said that car was his brother's car, so I thought it was the BIA car. I wasn't sure. Troy, hang on here. Joe, you have a question?
Oh yeah, sure.
On the mic.
There you go. I think you're on.
All right, thank you.
Yes, President.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to make a point, but also try to seek some better answers to
Yes.
a situation that is pretty grave in all of Indian country, and you mentioned a little bit of it. It has to do with jurisdiction. I think there's a brainwashing in Indian country because it's happening in the Indian country as I speak, and that is the jurisdiction about, we talk about sovereignty, and we talk about the tribal reservation or the land base. It is our sovereign lands, and as tribal officials, we are bound to protect the well-being of our people and anybody that set foot on that land base. But by the same token, we also have to address the fact that there are a lot of criminal activities going on by the other side, if you will, the non-Indian.
Yes.
And they set foot on tribal lands, but some of our own tribal police, BIA police, and others are afraid to handle this jurisdiction issue, and you just mentioned that a while ago.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, whether we're breaking the law or what, at Okewinge in New Mexico, we have set our tribal police and gave them orders from the tribal council that no matter who it is that commits a crime on our land base, could be blue, black, orange, green, or white, we have jurisdiction over it in the name of sovereignty. Now, the Oliphant case is the case that has been hampering Indian country throughout the United States. But our police officers are under the same impression. And I know of a
Right.
situation where the criminal non-Indian fella had a gun against a tribal member. Tribal police was called, and they said, "I'm sorry, man, we can't touch him because we don't have jurisdiction." And I say boo hiss on that. We have jurisdiction, and so the non-Indian community better take note of that. And if it comes to Supreme Court, so be it, because it's already been the Supreme Court, and that's what set the precedent in the Oliphant case. But the place where we're addressing that, sort of touching the, breaking the ice, is the VAWA. That the VAWA, we're going to have jurisdiction over perpetrators for violence against women. But the next step is to do it overall, and that we have jurisdiction over anybody. And so my point is that if the tribes are acting sovereign, inherent sovereignty, then they do have jurisdiction. Doesn't matter what Oliphant said. So we need to act that way. So thank you. If you have any words to that, appreciate it.
It would be very helpful. I appreciate that comment very much, and it would also be helpful, too, for anyone who has this point of view to come to the hearing this afternoon. Starts at 1:30? You know, because we need to have that in the record of our proceedings, too. But I appreciate it. And I just say to you, you know, Oliphant, I think everybody knows this background, right? Oliphant was Supreme Court decision 1978, and it flipped Indian law on its head. You know, up until then, the Supreme Court was very clear that tribes retained powers unless Congress stripped those powers away. Oliphant flipped that around for law enforcement and said the ability to exercise criminal jurisdiction over a non-native, non-Indian person was, quote unquote, inconsistent with their domestic dependent status. That's the line from Justice Rehnquist. And you know, a lot of us think Oliphant was wrongly decided. We know Congress could fix it. And you know, what it's going to take are stories like that. I mean, the story that you just told, and we're trying to build up, you know, an accurate record about all of the things that we see. I don't know how, I've trained hundreds of police officers with some people in this room, you know, and NCAI helped out with that. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I've run into so many folks who use jurisdiction as an excuse to do their basic duty. And we all have to follow the law. And we got to get the law changed wherever we can, and we need to make these arguments. I would just say we can't be shy about making the arguments. We cannot be shy about it. We got to do, you know, just like what you said, and get out there and really explain to people this is the tragedy that's happening. My friend Jeff Davis is here. He's our executive director. He's the assistant U.S. attorney detailed from the Western District of Michigan. Now, I got to tell you, he's a member of Turtle Mountain Chippewa. Mr. Davis, we recruited Mr. Davis. He didn't volunteer. We came to him because we wanted somebody who we knew would be strong and knew this system very well. He and I were up in Michigan this last weekend, and there was another prosecutor there, a federal prosecutor, very well-intentioned person, and she had just been assigned recently the Indian Country docket. And she was just kind of astonished. She'd been in the U.S. Attorney's Office for a long time, and she didn't know there was federal jurisdiction up there. I mean, if a career prosecutor who's really smart doesn't know that, I mean, what about the rest of the world? How little do they know about what you all go through every day and what that's about? So we've got to try to explain to people the injustice. If you talk to any local police chief or a local state's or DA's office, they'll tell you that they won't know about this, but they're shocked to find out that you don't have complete jurisdiction over your land. How can you run a law enforcement prosecution shop like that? And I think the answer is we got to find a way to make sure the tribes run everything. So we got to follow the law. We got to get this on the record. You got to speak out. You got to do your duty as you see it. And we have to have recommendations. One of the things about being independent is, I mean, you know, I was a Bush 43 appointee. I'm serving on an Obama commission. You know, we're as nonpartisan, frankly, as you can get. We all feel like this system needs to be changed. We got to work together to change it, whether we're native or non-native. You know, this system is not acceptable, and what you said is absolutely not acceptable. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Brian Clattisby. I'm the chairman of the Swinomish Tribe in Washington.
Oh, yes,
and
sir.
I just want to thank you for that great presentation. And forgive my Jamestown French, but we as tribal leaders should be very pissed off by what we heard and learned today. I mean, I've been the chairman for 15 years, and you educated me today. And I think you educated a lot of leaders here today about what is going on in Indian country. And so I think it is up to us. And keep sharing this story. You had a lot of people in this room today. I'm not sure how many heard the entire presentation, but you have to keep repeating this story, and we as leaders have to keep repeating this story for you in an Indian country. So if we could get a copy of what you just shared with us,
Sure,
that would
sure.
be great, because it is valuable information, and you're right, it's all about sovereignty, and we need to take control of that now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, very much. Thank you. I know I got time for just one more. Let me just ask for a show of hands. How many of you either have a teenager or have had teenagers in your life?
Oh.
I mean, I got one right now. He's learning to drive, and it's so fun because one of our vehicles is a big Chevy truck, and it's so fun. I take him on these hairpin mountain roads to learn to drive, and it's you know, except when I'm sitting in there, sweat's pouring down my forehead. But you know, did your teenagers ever do stupid things?
No.
I mean, I love my son. I love him deeply, but you know, he just does really stupid things, and not just to his little sister. And you know, everybody, we all have that in common as parents and grandparents. We all have in common that we've been through this experience. And you know, we got to be able to tell another parent, what about Mr. Boneshirt? Yeah, he did something terrible, and he needs to. There have to be consequences. He's got to be punished for what he did. I understand that, but should he really die in prison? Should that young man, who's a year older than my son, should he die in prison because nobody even thought that maybe a 1938 law ought to be looked at? And you know, that's the kind of world we got to try to build. So
We got to vet a lot of this afternoon.
Yep.
The hearing is.
we got the hearing. The hearing is in D 136.
At what time?
1:30. And if you go, you will see commission members, Jefferson Keel and other people. So we really appreciate that. So one more question.
Wainona Sanyala, Wallapai tribe
Yes.
from Peach Springs, Arizona.
Yes.
And I just stand here proud and tall to say that we have Ted Kwasula, that's a member of your commission right now. Obama appointed him. And he's our tribal member from Wallapai, and we're just proud to have him. And he has tried a lot of ways to help our tribe, and he's not selfish. He will not only help our tribe, he'll help anybody that calls for him. Anybody that says Ted, he will jump. But, you know, on the same issue that President Joe Garcia had spoke about, we do need something done. We do need something done. And please hear our cry, because it's coming to our little kids. It's coming to sexual molestation. They're bringing in the drugs. And we've had that problem, that myth. We've had that problem on the res, and I'm sure everybody has experienced that on their res. And something has to be done. They come to the reservations because they know we cannot touch them. And it's very sad, because they're bringing it to our people. We have 2 young boys that were good athletes, very good. They grew up with my boys, and their dad is non-Indian, Mexican. He gave them the drugs. Now they're just vegetation sitting somewhere in institutes. They're only 28, 29. One's younger, a couple of years younger, and it's very sad because they would have been athletes. They could have been a Michael Jordan. They could have been something, but due to their drugs that their dad gave them, it's very sad. He knew he can't be touched. He's non-Indian. So we really need help. It's not only those two. There's a lot that I could talk about. I could stand here and talk all day, cry with you. And it's very shameful that they choose our reservations, Indian kids, to sexually molest them. I've had 2 granddaughters that were molested. Very sad. Now they're 18 and 15. Very sad. But anyway, we need something done. We need something done on this. Not tomorrow. We need it yesterday. So please help us hear our cry. I know Ted will do it. With you, with all of us uniting together as Indian tribes, we need to sit and stand together. That's the only way we're going to get anything done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't have a question, I have a statement.
Yes.
The National Congress of American Indians is the first people's Congress. It is the most powerful body in this nation. And it is the one body that could really go after self-governance. When they give us self-governance on our reservation, they give us Public Law 280 right through our res. They give us the FBI to come in, and they just come in and look and leave. They don't do nothing. I excluded them off my reservation along with Eric Holder. They don't do their job. This here body, NCAI, it's the one that could move and change this laws. We gotta change it to Indian law. Forget about that English law and the king and queen and the kings and queens in Washington, D.C. Forget about them. You're the one speaking there. You're the one I'm going to place the burden on. You can carry it. You have education. You have the heart to listen to our tear and our prayers for our people. Everyone in this room can talk about methamphetamine and drugs and the troubles on our reservations and the perps that drive through our reservations under Public Law 280 we can't do nothing about. This is the Congress that can do something. This is the one that we have empowered. 565 tribes pay their way and pay their dues to be here. You do this now. Change that law. Make it a priority to really get us self-governance. Self-governance is just a piecemeal little tidbit from Washington, D.C. We got to change that. We are the first people. We can prove it. Thank you for your commitment, young man. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you, especially my birthday, for calling me a young man. I'm really grateful. Thank you.